Hey, I'm Joe. Today, we're looking at the bullshit political myth that the United States is a Christian nation. With shit like the Hobby Lobby decision, states instituting their own religious freedom restoration acts that are nothing more than thinly veiled legalized bigotry, and Texas getting Moses included as a founding father in textbooks while excluding Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, there's a shitstorm of propaganda floating around to try to force the notion that the US is a Christian nation. And that's what it is, propaganda, because it was never intended to get this way. This idea of the US as a Christian nation only started a few years ago. I shit you not, that's completely true. The Constitution is a secular document with no mention of Christianity or Jesus Christ. In fact, religion is only mentioned twice. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And Article 6 prevents religious tests for office. Even the Declaration of Independence only mentions a vague creator. It doesn't say God, Jesus, Odin, Bungie, or the flying spaghetti monster. In fact, the whole situation was made crystal clear in the 1797 Treaty of Tripoli, which received unanimous ratification in the Senate. Section 11 reads, "As the government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Mussulmen, and as the said states never have entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mahometan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries." Let me repeat that. This shit's important. 21 years after the Declaration of Independence and just 8 years after the Constitution became effective, the US Senate unanimously stated America was not founded on the Christian religion and is not a Christian nation. Every senator got a copy with the "We are not a Christian nation" language, and it was unanimously ratified by the Senate. Even back then, President John Adams, a founding father, felt it necessary to make sure everyone knew this shit was important. On signing the treaty, he added this to the public record. "Now be it known that I, John Adams, President of the United States of America, having seen and considered the said treaty, do, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, accept, ratify, and confirm the same, and every clause and article thereof, and to the end that the said treaty may be observed, performed with good faith on the part of the United States. I have ordered the premises to be made public, and I do hereby enjoin and require all persons bearing office, civil or military, within the United States, and all other citizens or inhabitants thereof, faithfully to observe and fulfill the said treaty and every clause and article thereof." Got it? Oh, and there's one more really obvious common sense thing. Why would the Founding Fathers institute a church and state union similar to what they were revolting from? In fact, Maryland Representative Luther Martin stated that some delegates to the Constitutional Convention argued for formally creating America as a Christian nation. Well, they were quickly shut down. Thomas Jefferson had rejoiced, saying it would ensure religious freedom for the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and the Mahometan, the Hindu and the infidel of every denomination. And George Washington sent a celebratory letter to a Jewish congregation in Rhode Island, rejoicing their freedom to worship. So when people like Pat Robertson, Billy Graham, Sean Hannity, Sarah Palin, Glenn Beck, Governor Rick Perry, Senator John McCain, Senator Ted Cruz, Governor Bobby Jindal, and a host of others tell you that America is a Christian nation, they're lying to you. This Christian nation bullshit started to surface around the Civil War and became more widely accepted during the Great Depression. Kevin Cruz, a Princeton history professor and author of One Nation Under God, has written about this. In his interview with Salon, capitalism and Christianity had been mixed by Americans before the New Deal, to be sure. In the 1920s, the ad man Bruce Barton wrote a bestseller called The Man Nobody Knows that repackaged Jesus Christ as the most successful executive of all time. These previous fusions of faith and free enterprise had always stressed their common social characteristics. But starting in the 1930s, Christianity and capitalism were fused in a more political context. In the 1930s, when the New Deal came about in response to the Great Depression, companies were trying real hard to win back the public. Bullshit organizations like American Liberty League were formed, but the public saw right through that. Realizing that the direct approach hadn't worked, these business leaders decided to outsource the work. In their private correspondence, they noted that the polls proved ministers were the most trusted men in America, and so they decided to recruit clergymen to make the case for them. So churches started spewing conservative political rhetoric, talking out against everything the New Deal represents, priming future political leaders like Eisenhower. February 12, 1948 was the first time "Under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance. Here's how it happened. Louis Albert Brown was the chaplain of the Illinois Society of the Sons of the American Revolution. He added the words "One Nation Under God" while leading a meeting on Lincoln's birthday, because Lincoln may have used it during his Gettysburg Address, where he's reported to have said, "That we here highly resolve that these dead men shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Being a lawyer, Lincoln was a stickler for language, and he went through several drafts. Scholars argue that the accepted version, hanging in the Lincoln Room of the White House, makes the intent of his words very clear, with the cunning use of commas. The intent being that the nation, with God's help, shall have a new birth of freedom. He didn't mean we are a nation under God, which would need different punctuation from a detail-obsessed orator such as Lincoln. But I digress, because the bullshit caught on. President Eisenhower, who at the time was a recently baptized Presbyterian, was eager to prove his faith by pushing a bill through to add it to the Pledge of Allegiance. Then on June 14, 1954, Public Law 83396 was signed into law. Eisenhower proclaimed, "From this day forward, the millions of our school children will daily proclaim in every city and town, every village and rural schoolhouse, the dedication of our nation and our people to the Almighty. In this way, we are reaffirming the transcendence of religious faith in America's heritage and future. In this way, we shall constantly strengthen those spiritual weapons which forever will be our country's most powerful resource, in peace or in war." 2 years later, Eisenhower adopted the official state motto, "In God We Trust." Man, such a good Presbyterian. Now, Scott Merriman, author of Religion and Law in America, notes that both the pledge and the motto became a way to differentiate the U.S. from the concept of communism, because those Soviets sponsored state atheism. Those heathens. So this is certainly an epic ton of next-level bullshit. Now, to put this all in perspective, let's look at some statements from 3 of the most important founding fathers. First, there's Thomas Jefferson's letter to Peter Carr in 1787. "Question with boldness even the existence of God, because, if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear." In case you missed that, that was Jefferson tossing around his signature intellectual superiority. It only works when you're right, which he was, and that's why they called him the sage. James Madison wrote in 1819, "The civil government functions with complete success by the total separation of the church from the state, and the Constitution of the U.S. forbids everything like an establishment of a national religion." Madison, who was an extremely serious guy, and without a doubt, the hardest working person in the new government when it came to getting the Constitution ratified. So you can trust his judgment on this shit. And here's my favorite. George Washington wrote in a letter to the United Baptist Chamber of Virginia, May 1789. If I could conceive that the general government might ever be so administered as to render the liberty of conscience insecure, I beg you will be persuaded that no one will be more zealous than myself to establish effectual barriers against the horrors of spiritual tyranny and every species of religious persecution. In case you missed that, that's George Washington being a badass and reminding everyone he's a badass. Seriously, they called him the town destroyer. Imagine how terrifying it would have been to get that kind of letter about religious freedom from the town destroyer. That's right. The warrior, often referred to as the father of our nation, felt so strongly about keeping religion out of government and politics that he sent a threatening letter to a newly formed Baptist-only local government. You can bet the United Baptist Chamber of Virginia had shit their collective pants. Now, many apologists will use the argument that the Founding Fathers were Christians and were driven by Christian ethics. That's probably mostly true, but they also weren't fools and didn't suffer fools. You see, their brand of Christian ethics was far superior than today's. They knew they should never impose their beliefs on anyone, for any reason, ever, and busted their asses to make sure they couldn't. Because no one wants to be on the receiving end of the Adam stink eye. Especially you people. Man, you should be ashamed. So there it is, a very secular episode 48. Our last episode on the financial corruption in California universities got mostly hell yeah comments on YouTube. So we're going to look at the comments on AboveTopSecret.com. J Hum said, anything and everything that the government and money are involved in is broken and corrupted to the point that it'll never get better without a complete reset. Shredhead1 didn't quite agree with us. The reason college costs went through the roof is because of guaranteed government loans. That is what allowed the uni system in the US to hike up costs and actually hire more administrators now than they have actual teachers. Yeah, the student loan system is also a big scam and also part of the problem, but we see the financial corruption in universities as the biggest part. Charlie V saw the bigger picture. To me, it's all about corruption, tricky deals, and hidden agendas that have crept into just about every other facet of our society. And I blame the federal government all the way down to the state governments for making that so. We are facing a crisis that needs a solution. There's also a great discussion about the high cost of textbooks. Highly recommend you check it out. Click here down below to see the discussion. So, what's today's total?
12.
This time, we'll take your suggestions for the charity I give $100 to once that total reaches 100. Now, if you find a story that's bullshit worthy and you want to share with me, use hashtag NLBS when posting to any social media site. And if you're really motivated, make me a video. If we like it, we'll feature you on our next segment. Of course, you can email me anytime at joe@nextlevelbullshit.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube, and be sure to watch all our shows on nextlevelbullshit.com. Don't forget to go to thenlbs.spreadshirt.com to get shirts and other cool swag. Now, we'll see you soon with another pile of bullshit. Until then, according to reports from CNBC last week, the U.S. Social Security Administration is in deep shit. In just 5 years, expenses will exceed income. And by some reports, they'll be out of money in another 5 years. And then in other news, on the same day, Bloomberg reported a record number of American citizens living abroad having renounced their citizenship. Something tells me those two stories are related. I don't think it's a good thing.